and the creative team took so many risks that on paper shouldn't work, but they do. And those transitions just feel so seamless. As a filmmaker, I know that you love taking something really familiar and adding a fresh perspective to it. How did you and your co-writer David approach taking this idea that's been with your cinematographer Justin for so long and find ways to incorporate all these unexpected elements? And how did you strike that right balance of deciding how far to push it?
Yeah, I mean, I think taking risks was always part of the name of the game, right? I think for us, we wanted something different, but we also knew that this small movie was the way to take a risk. Like, I think in bigger films, we have other people involved that will be like, no, let's keep it in this lane. But knowing that this was going to be our moment to do these big leaps and do something really, really funky, like we just kind of went there, right? We can take the musical as an example. When that idea came to be, and I was like, David, I feel like this is we have to do this musical number. And it just, well, he's like, okay, but we kind of, how do we weave it in, right? How does it make sense to who she is? And so that is why in the very beginning of the diner scene, there's just one little line that says, like, remember when you used to sing karaoke and you said that my voice, like it's just a small bit that at that moment, it's just an example of how their relationship was kind of crumbling apart. But then it comes back of like, oh, okay, she really could sing. And now this is kind of her moment to shine and take the narrative. So we just knew that we needed to make buttons for all the different genre changes, and also, weave it in slowly but surely. There's hard cuts, but there's always a moment to breathe between the next
Mhm.
moment, the next genre twist, right? Um, and I actually think pacing of the whole film helps us tremendously when it comes to jumping around like that. And that's all editorial, like it could read on the page, but we definitely massage things editorial to make sure it felt like the right time to shift, when to pull back, when to push even further, etc. So, it's a whole puzzle.
Speaking of that pacing, such a huge credit to you and the creative team for creating these really long sequences that never feel drawn out. And it's only after hearing you discuss the film that that length that becomes apparent. Can you share a little bit about how you brought those moments to life and what challenges or freedoms that comes with creating such extended yet engaging scenes?
Yeah. I mean, I think that approach was in the beginning a way to solve the issue of production shooting days as well, right? By having long scenes, it really kind of helps our shoot because instead of a bunch of broken up locations and scenes and stop and go of camera, it just allowed us to stay in a moment for a long time. And thus, when we were shooting it, we would do very, very long takes. So I approached it kind of like theater in a way. Like I love a theater show. I love being on stage. I love being in the audience, and I'm so happy to watch something unfold. So I think from the actor standpoint, we also kind of took that approach as well. So everyone really, really came prepared to kind of do the whole sequence. But I did get everyone a heads up, like we're gonna break it up if we need to, because we'll have different beats. We'll move the camera in certain ways, but if we can prepare yourself to know the whole 13-page or 16-page moment, I really want to try to do things in one long take. And listen, if I can see one scene in one long take and have the actors really do their magic, it's going to work, right? Like if it
Mhm.
works in that moment, it's going to work being cut up a little bit. But the edits help us and help the audience really stay engaged. But the scene and how it's massaged and how it moves, that's going to work and be really, really engaging because we see it live, right? Um, so it was amazing that everyone on our cast had that theater background. So right from the very, very get-go, it was like, this is our approach to these long sequences. So we just, need to listen to each other, you need to respond. Every take was obviously very, very different, but there was always a way to kind of bring back to the original idea. So I don't know, it was really, really fun in that
That actually
way.
might be, yeah, the answer to the next question that I had for you. But emotionally, that trunk sequence navigates so many different places, capturing the ebbs and flows of the dynamic between Dale and Emma in such a raw and authentic way. As a director and co-writer, how do you create that space and environment on set where your ensemble can tap into kind of the emotional depths to bring that moment to life, especially within a confined space?
I mean, I think the confined space definitely helped, right? No one, no one likes to be stuck in a very small space in general. So immediately adding that layer felt pretty intense. And how we shot that scene was very, very practical. So I think for the actors, it was really just about getting through and pushing it through the entire 13 pages of that scene. Um, because all the elements that we were bringing in were already there. The trunks was shaky. It was very, very uncomfortable. It was really hot. So all of that stuff adds in how an actor could approach a scene. I think for that particular moment, we did break up. We have a jump cut in that scene, so that was a hard stop and a big reset. And the really vulnerable place that they got into after they both got out, that was also a hard reset because the camera really flipped in that way and we saw things differently. I don't know if you caught that, but we flipped the camera on its side so that we can see the faces that way, right? So knowing that, that was obviously a natural place for us to reset, set up camera and talk about what that moment really means in that way. So that was really helpful, having those beats kind of prepped and broken up along the way. And just, I think, comfortable for them to be like, oh, maybe at this point, I only need to know the lines at this moment, and then I can do a
Mm.
break. I can continue on. So that's always helpful, I think, for the actors to know what's ahead and what the plan is to shoot something so big.
As you were saying earlier, the film explores a variety of different tones, each told from the kind of the perspective of the character. With Dale and Emma, it begins like kind of as a drama, and then when they kidnap her story, it evolves into kind of a comedy of errors, and by the end, it transitions into this really dark thriller. As you were navigating these shifts in genre, how did you ensure that transitions felt seamless? And how did you recognize where that moment was to make that shift?
Yeah, I think it's in the script, right? I think we wrote it specifically for those shifts, and it's very obvious within the dialogue when we're kind of more dramatic and when it's a little bit more comedic. Um, And we also did that with the camera in different ways. The way that we wanted to approach, the camera not moving very much and all of a sudden adding a movement, adding kind of a steady cam or adding handheld shots, like all of that really helps dictate what the look and feel of the film is. Um, and because they were so standalone, those scenes, like you can really kind of section them off into each genres. I think everybody was on the same page of what we were shooting, of just like, okay, now we're in the house, we're in the thriller escape. This is about Emma
Mm.
getting out, and this is about Dale trying to recover, and if everyone's on the same page of that, we're never gonna go off tone, you know what I mean? Um, so I think we were all just really, really clear and communicated about how it should feel and how we were gonna shoot it. Um, that it kind of worked out, I did this big lookbook and gave it to everybody in the very beginning of prep. So like all the key department heads, my editor, DP, production designer, gaffer, and all the actors had this big lookbook and it had specific notes about like this is how we're going to shoot this first trunk scene, this is how we're going to shoot the diner, this is how we're going to shoot the Chinese restaurant, and these are references and like even almost direct cuts and frame shots of how um we're gonna really elevate that feeling, right? I think one of the direct shots was the one that's kind of in all the press photos of Emma and the gun and that kind of like long lensy feel. That example was like right there. I'm like, this is the moment we know that something is about to
Mm.
go down, So a lot of that prep work was done before we even got to set and just kind of making sure that everyone was really, really aligned for the entire movie so that the actors know when to give a little bit, when to let go, etc. So I thought that was really effective.
You need to share that lookbook online. I feel like this is a master class in filmmaking. I also love how you incorporated Emma's internal dialogue in such a unique and seamless way, like you were saying earlier. And it really enhances that moment rather than detracting from it. It beautifully symbolizing kind of her reclaiming her power. And I think it's one of those moments that's going to stay with audiences after they see this. I would love to kind of know the conversations that you had with Alice about that moment because I feel like it's such a standout.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why Alice was kind of, our always number one, was because she had an emotional connection to music. She had her show at the time, Zoe's was still around, but also she just had her own music. So that conversation was fairly easy of like, listen, we all love music and this is how we feel when we have a song. So this is what this moment is for her. Like read the lyrics of the song. She is talking to him directly about what she's going to do now. And the genre for her, the rock kind of sound is not something that she's used to. And I think it was like, you have to own the rock. Like you've got the voice for it. Like let us help you make sure you feel that way. Um, so I feel like that was a fairly easy execution because naturally Alice is really just going to nail it with anything that comes to music. I remember when we re-recorded that song in the studio, and it was like, oh my gosh, like she added like a rawness in her voice that we rarely
Hmm.
got to hear and kind of her pop stuff. And I loved it. I'm like, yeah, like if this is how it is in the studio, like when we're on set, you should sing it. Sing it so that you feel a little bit more, even though it's, 3 a.m. in the middle of the night, but that's what we're supposed to feel. Just kind of singing it naturally, understand what the lyrics are, and then you're there.
It's so hard to watch. Selflessly, I wish you would release that music video, but I feel like when you were going on that journey, it's such a big payoff. And in your director's statement, you mentioned wanting to make a film about race without making a film about race. And you've done so effectively through Alice and Emilio's characters, incorporating really timely conversations and nuanced moments in a way that feels very slice of life. And I'd love to hear about your collaboration with the two of them and how you created that space for them to bring their lived experiences to these roles, and how that process maybe differ working with an actor whose kind of experiences maybe align with yours and versus ones whose perspective is so different.
Yeah, I recall a really great conversation with Emilio in the very beginning about the character. And I will share that in the version of the script that he read, his occupation was actually not a glassblower. His occupation originally was an actor because we wanted to add an element of playing a character for him. And he was like, I want to push back on this. I'm like, okay, let's talk about it, right? It's like, I want to push back on this because being an actor is such a privilege. And it is not really kind of supporting, I think, what this man is trying to do, which is doing something that he would not do, but almost being forced to do in that way. And I was like, okay, I really, really, I love this. And then we kind of talked into his experience being an actor, experience being a Latino man. And I realized that his character needed to shift into someone that had no other choice but to do this job, right?
Mm,
Being an actor, that's a choice to kind of go method in that way and feel something. But making a choice or not having any other choice but to do this for your own good and for your family is a much stronger stake and a much stronger character specifically for the kind of man that Joe represents, right? And that's kind of the everyday working man that is critically stereotyped all the time. So because Emilio kind of brought up this conversation and kind of his hesitation for it, I was like, yes, I'm going to go back into the world of the script and kind of figure out something that is much stronger, that kind of elevates this idea a little bit more, that kind of even adds in another layer of like racial complex that is really, really nuanced, right? So, and I still wanted to kind of have it be a funny occupation that's also unexpected. So that's kind of how the glass blower came to be, because it's not someone that you meet every single day, but it is also an art form where you have to really be in the zone for. So
mm.
then for me, it's believable that Joe is so committed to something that was so artistically driven because it is feeling something different than you would outside of your normal self. Um, so I don't know, I love those conversations with my actors. I think Emilio really wanted to make sure that he represented who he thought the character would best be. I think for Alice, even prior to starting this project, we always kind of had conversations as Asian women about being fetishized, about being the submissive. Like we've all gone through those relationships in our days, and that was just a commonality that we had and something that I wanted to bring up without being like, hey, this is a film about how Asian women can be submissive and not kind of realize that they can be powerful and aggressive and strong-willed. So that was an easy one. I think a lot of Asian women have experienced that, and hopefully they see a little bit about their experience in this character, but also kind of see the kind of hopeful side that can come out of the
Yeah.
other.
Beautifully said. And correct me if I'm wrong, but David took the first half of the film and wrote it. You took the second half because you're very well versed in the thriller, and then you came together and kind of worked on each other's parts. What is that process like, and what did you kind of learn from reading what he had originally written, and how did that influence kind of the overall narrative?
Yeah. We had one big outline, so we knew what the whole movie was, right? And it felt natural for him to take the beginning and for me to take the second half. And I think, honestly, I don't remember too much of like an issue between this process. I felt like this was a very seamless process and we wrote it rather quickly. I think we started brainstorming in August of 2019, and we had a pretty strong script to go to casting in January of 2020. So it went pretty quickly, which was really, really great. And I think because we both focused on our first initial instinctual strong suits, that was really helpful. And then blending it together really was just about those details to make sure the characters were consistent throughout and that there was growth in the middle and there was those transitions that we needed. And then obviously, since I knew that I was going to be directing it, I wanted some purposeful writing about how it could be seen or read. So that was
Mm.
very helpful going to the first half. And I think David's so great about dialogue, so he kind of added his dialogue twinkles in the very end and added those comedic beats in kind of the big showdown space. So it was a really great process for us. I can't wait to do it again because it was really great. It was really fun too.
Let's hear if you need to make more projects. Representation really does begin with writers like you and David and directors who are actively pushing for this change. What advice would you give aspiring filmmakers, especially within the Asian community, who may feel like breaking into this industry is out of reach?
That is a really great question. I don't know right now, right? But I think the only thing that can always offer is to kind of just keep going, right? My philosophy in this industry is to outwit, outlast, and outplay, just like Survivor. Because it changes all the time. It ebbs and flows. You never know what kind of material someone's looking for. You never know what this industry is going to want one day. Someone else is making those decisions. But if we remain true to what we want in our integrity and our work and our creativity, eventually I do believe that it'll catch hold, that it'll push forward, you know. So that's it. It's a marathon. It's like beyond a marathon, you know what I mean? I don't it's hard to be in this space, but I think if you believe in your work, it will pay off. And that's why I'm so proud of Samson. Like I love this movie. It took forever to make this and it's a journey now that it's out in the world and I don't know where it's going to go next. But the fact that I'm really, really proud of it and that it represents what I intended as a filmmaker and what it represents as a whole in this industry and in our AAPI community, that's all I can ask for, right?
Yeah, you should be proud of this film. You definitely have outplayed, outwitted, and outsmarted everybody with this project. I got one final question for you, but outside of this, what's next for you? I feel like you're such a needed voice in this space right now.
Yeah, I have several projects that I'm waiting for someone to be like, you know what, Ruth, we're going to give you all this money to produce. I have this script called Riley and Cy that's a sci-fi drama romance. It's, Ex Machina meets Blue Valentine. It's got an AAPI male lead this time. That's pretty critical to the crutch. And it's something that I need to make because it's very, very personal and it's definitely a level up in terms of scope because it's got that science fiction element. So I just had that project that is fully written and ready to go, and I'm waiting for someone to bang on my door and give me all this money to produce. Um, and a couple other writing projects that's percolating that should be really, really fun. So